Hello, my name is Linda Timmons, and I'm the President and CEO of Mosaic. Mosaic is very excited to partner with United Lutheran Seminary to have this course called Faithful Ministry of People with All Abilities as part of the Kindling Faith series. We presented this introductory session live in December of 2025. However, with some technical issues, we had a problem with the recording, and so I volunteered to record this so that people who were unable to attend the introductory session in person can have the information that I think sets up the future of this course well. So again, this is an introductory session. We are so excited about the strong interest in this course. And while we're together on this recorded video, I really want to focus on four things. The first is, why is Mosaic a good partner with United Lutheran Seminary to present this course? The second has to do with, why does community matter, and why is that important to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities? Then we want to have a short preview of the courses yet to come, and we'll end by talking about gratitude that Mosaic has for a chance to offer this program. So before we go any further, I think it's important that we say some things out loud to each other to really level the playing field. And that has to do with, historically, there's been a mistaken belief that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities don't have the capacity to experience, express, or explore their faith lives. And that's simply not true. People with intellectual and developmental disabilities have both the right and the ability to lead deeply spiritual lives of their choosing, just like you and me. The rest of this course is built on this premise that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have the desire and deserve the opportunity to grow and improve their spiritual lives. Now, one of the things we're going to talk about is how you build an inclusive congregation. And I've heard often throughout my career that people say, well, my church is already inclusive. We really don't need to focus on welcoming people with intellectual and developmental disabilities because we're a welcoming congregation. But take a minute to just read this quote from the parent of a child with autism. Read the second half of that last sentence again. You just don't see us in church. So I've had some experience over time of preaching in congregations, and I'd like to ask the pastor before I go, do you know if anyone in your congregation is familiar with Mosaic or legacy organizations, Bethany and Martin Luther Home, or do you know if anyone in your church has someone that has an intellectual or developmental disability and maybe would like a chance just to speak to me? And it happens 9 times out of 10 where the pastors say, no, I don't think anyone's really familiar with your work. And I'm not aware of anyone that has a child or an immediate family member with IDD. But what happens when I process out with the pastor and I'm greeting people at the end of the service is that I am often spoken to about people who have a grandchild or a sibling or maybe even a child themselves. And they share this with me, that they haven't felt comfortable coming to worship. So I'm a pastor's kid, so I'm going to just say this. I think churches often overestimate their welcoming culture. So here's the truth. Many of us have places where we sit when we go to church. We expect things to be quiet when we go to church, right? That people follow the liturgy, stand up when they're supposed to, sit down when they're supposed to. That sometimes is really difficult for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Sometimes they speak when they're not supposed to speak. Sometimes they get super excited about something and they'll vocalize, right? Or take some kind of physical action to express their enthusiasm for something, right? We've even had people who've been told, well, there's a nursery for a reason. You should take your adult child with intellectual disabilities to the nursery. And our answer to that is no. That we need to learn to be more welcoming when people come to worship. Many people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families do not attend places of worship just simply because they don't feel welcome. So that's our value that we're bringing to this course, is that we believe, again, that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities deserve the opportunity to worship in a place of faith that is important to them. So let's move into the first subject. Some of you might be familiar with the work of Mosaic, but I'm guessing not all of you are. So I thought it was important that we answer the question right from the beginning: why are we a good partner for United and to support your learning? So Mosaic has a 112-year legacy of serving people with diverse needs, especially people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Since day one, we've been affiliated with the Lutheran Church in all of its iterations, and today with the ELCA. I like to say at Mosaic, we look back with gratitude and forward in faith. And our purpose statement is that we are called to love and serve. So Mosaic today serves more than 5,000 people in 12 states, and we have a workforce of about 5,000 people. We are the largest faith-based provider in this space, and we're in the top 10 of providers working in the intellectual and developmental disability space. In fact, we're the largest nonprofit in that sector. We have a very unique opportunity here to engage with United, who has a strong reputation for continuing education. And this is really an innovative program because there is not a lot of curriculum available related to ministry support to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families and their caregivers. So I invite you to watch this short video to introduce you to Mosaic.
On a June day near the town of Axtell, members of the Dahl family gathered to celebrate the visionary work of their ancestor, Reverend K.G. William Dahl.
Pastor Dahl came from southern Sweden in a fairly well-to-do family. His father was a Lutheran pastor.
By 1907, Dahl had followed his father's path and was ordained as a Lutheran minister in Illinois. He soon moved to Omaha, where he became friends with a man he simply called Gustav. He was a man who would fuel the passion of Dahl's life.
I would surmise he's probably a person that had a mental illness, not a developmental disability, but he had been locked at the county poor farm and actually kept in a locked unit. Pastor Dahl visited him. He had no clothes, he had no food, he'd been mistreated, and Gustav begged Pastor Dahl in Swedish to take him from that place.
But it was something Dahl was not in the position to do, and it haunted him for the rest of his life.
He just believed that the church should fulfill this need that society had to include people at the margins.
Dahl began researching institutional care for people living on the edge of society.
Unfortunately, people with disabilities were oftentimes seen as the sign of some sort of genetic flaw. And of course, we didn't know enough about genetic or acquired causes for any kinds of disabilities. And so there was shame attached to some of it. The state facility, for years, people were buried with numbers on their graves instead of with names. It happened in many states.
In late 1912, a small church in Axtell needed a pastor and hired Dahl. When he arrived, he saw opportunity.
He became impressed with the fact that this would be a good place to have an organization, to meet the kinds of human needs that had become a real burden to his heart.
Dahl shared his vision with his congregation of creating a home for the disabled.
People weren't sure whether or not he would be successful, but the sentiment seemed to be, it's worth a try.
54 members gave $1 each. In 1912 money, $1 would buy a week of groceries for a family of 4. Within 3 years, the first home was dedicated on the present site of Bethany Village.
It was really faith-based organizations which took the lead in social causes, and not only developmental disabilities, but in many other aspects of social needs.
But as Dahl's mission was taking shape, he became ill and died from a heart condition. It was 1917, and he was only 34 years old.
I can remember riding on his shoulders as a little. Yeah, he died when I was just 2 years old.
The loss was hard, but Dahl's pioneering work at Bethany Village continued. As yet another Lutheran charity was taking shape in another small Nebraska town.
Martin Luther Homes began in 1925 in Sterling.
Granddad was one of the 5 founders. He was cut from that traditional German paterfamilias kind of model, and I think ran a pretty tight ship at home, but obviously was a man of compassion.
5 men of Lutheran faith, but of German heritage, organized a groundbreaking school for children with disabilities.
The word got out within the German Lutheran community that they were beginning Martin Luther, and people arrived to be served before the work on the school was done.
The school quickly filled with children from near and far, and with the support of many communities and many faiths, it flourished.
There was a newsletter that circulated and unabashedly asked for money and for soap and for clothing and for canned goods and school supplies and just everything.
The support that came from people, even during the Depression, who had little to nothing, the farmers who gave of their crops, the women who came and canned.
In 1953, Martin Luther Homes moved to its present location in Beatrice. With growing demand for good homes and schools for people with disabilities, the work of both Martin Luther Homes in Beatrice and Bethany Mission in Axtell expanded beyond Nebraska.
I think both organizations were ahead of their time. In fact, I know they were. Martin Luther Home provided a state-of-the-art educational facility. Much before special education was required, at Bethany, we had therapeutic services such as physical therapy, occupational therapy. We had a program that you would now think of as a special education program before it was ever required. So both organizations have a rich history of just doing what I would say is the right thing well before it was required by law or regulation. So you can see, as we reflect on the history of the organization, just how much things have changed and how long we've been around and all the dedication of the people who've come before us. And now our generation are the temporary caretakers of an organization whose mission began in 1913. And it's a pretty humbling and amazing experience. So I came up with this way to use the S-curve, the sigmoid curve, to really look at the 112-year history of the organization in a way that demonstrates change. So you might notice right away, without me even giving you any of the details, is that the change continues to happen more and more rapidly. So from 1913 to 1979, you can see that was a long extended period of time. Bethany founded in 1913. Martin Luther Homes founded in 1925. Both organizations tended to be more focused on a medical or custodial model of care, although people came to live at Bethany for some extended period of time, and people often went to Martin Luther Home just long enough to receive an education or skill-based training, and then return home. Our staff were people who were deeply, deeply dedicated to the work. We benefited from the work of deacons and deaconesses who wanted to make sure that people got the care they needed because it was the right thing to do. We had 2 campuses based in Sterling, eventually Beatrice, and then in Axtell, Nebraska. Those campus-based services were filled with innovation. occupational and physical therapy, special education. Those were remarkable things at the time. In fact, for both organizations, people arrived to be served before we were ready to serve them because families were so desperate for care that was centered around their loved one. How was care paid for? It was either paid through by the family themselves, we would call that private pay today, or paid through donations. In fact, many times bills weren't paid unless the mail train came and there was a bag of mail full of donations for the organization itself. We had incredibly high levels of volunteer engagement. People were compelled to do that through their ethnic connection to our organizations and through a religious connection to the organization. But in 1980, we expanded beyond those campuses, yet we had periods of significant financial challenges as we grew. Medicaid was introduced, so funding was then switched from private pay and not so heavily relying on donations. People moved back home. People had come from all over the country to be served by Bethany or Martin Luther Home on that campus, but they returned to places like Illinois and Colorado and Iowa, where they received community-based services. It was a period of rapidly transforming services, moving from an institutional setting, although I believe we did it better and differently than most organizations, to people who moved back home and received community-based services. In 2003, Bethany and Martin Luther Homes consolidated to create Mosaic, and the move behind that consolidation was really to drive more efficiency in terms of how we run and manage the organization. It was a transformational time for the organization as both Bethany and Martin Luther Home had been friendly competitors. In fact, we had many places where we both had services, but we came together in ways that truly made the organization stronger. And that is when we began to really become one large multi-state organization. So that time period of 2003 to 2013 led us right up to our centennial celebration. But during that time, if you remember your American history, we had a significant economic downturn in 2008, 2009, which led to significant cuts in Medicaid funding and for the need for Mosaic to respond to those challenging times, which we did. We did that in many ways. Some of that you can see through what happened from 2014 to 2019, which was a period of really pretty rapid mission expansion as we began to explore new services to provide and new places to provide them. In 2020 through 2025, you'll all remember this is the era of COVID. So we had a global pandemic, and the people supported by Mosaic were incredibly vulnerable to the virus. In fact, we lost more than 30 people to COVID during that time. We realized that people in service and their families were looking for a different type of service. And so during that time period, 2020 to 2025, Mosaic greatly expanded our use of a program we call Mosaic at Home. Mosaic at Home is a program where people receive highly personalized services in a home of an independent contractor who Mosaic oversees. And this service line is actually the service line that produces the most positive outcomes for people because the care is so centered around the person themselves. So again, another period of rapid transformation, not necessarily in who we serve, but how we serve them and the use of the Mosaic at Home model. Now, as we're just getting ready to enter 2026, Mosaic is really focused in the next 3 years on building an infrastructure to operate as a healthcare organization in a very competitive market. We've had rapid changes in how people are served and the services that are provided. Mosaic's story is really unique. We were started by immigrants. We had strong religious ties. We had strong Midwestern roots. Many nonprofits were started when needs arose, and that instills a trust from the public to the work of Mosaic because we're a faith-based nonprofit organization. We continue to be grounded in our mission and vision and values, and we have a long track record of significant success in serving people and doing it well. So in future sessions, you're going to learn a lot about supporting people with IDD, but I just wanted to give you, before we go any further, some context about caregivers and families that support people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So the largest provider of services for people with intellectual and disabilities is families. And whether that's by choice or because of limited options, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes, we know that 800,000 people or thereabout live at home with caregivers who are paid or unpaid to serve their family member that has disabilities. We also know that 1 in 4 of those caregivers are age 60 or above, and that they provide at least 40 hours of care per week. Sometimes we call that the sandwich generation, right? Where you are focused on your own parents, maybe, caring for your immediate family member, have your own children or grandchildren, right? And so families are caught in this opportunity to serve their loved one because they want to do that, but also the stress of this. And some people with IDD require a considerable amount of care. It depends on the person. So we also know that about 45% of these families say they experience financial strain. Medicaid doesn't pay for everything. Someone might not even be on Medicaid, right? We also know that there can be emotional and mental strain, depending on the person you support. Being a caregiver brings a lot of responsibility. It's a 24/7, 365-day-a-year responsibility. And we also know that caregivers often experience challenges with their own employment, as they might need to have excessive time off to support their loved one who gets ill or to take them to medical or therapy appointments, that kind of thing. And I just think it's important that you're all aware of this, that families may choose to serve their loved one at home, and that's terrific. But it's not easy, and caregivers need care as well. So some of the barriers to accessing services that families often experience is that there just aren't services available. Many states have waiting lists, and for even those states that say we don't have a waiting list for services, they're just providing a little bit of service regardless of the amount of service that a person needs. So for example, you might have requested full-time residential support for your loved one, but the state says for now what we'll give you is 8 hours of intermittent support during the week, right? And so it's something, but it's not what you'd asked for. And so that can be a challenge. There's also a challenge around eligibility for services. Sometimes people just don't meet the criteria to become eligible, and it doesn't always make sense to those of us outside the system, but that can be a real challenge. And then also providers such as Mosaic continue to deal with significant workforce shortages, and providers in our space are reporting that they are slowing down admissions or even closing programs because they simply don't have the employees to do the work. So these are challenges that are out there for families and for people with disabilities. For providers like Mosaic, Mosaic is 99% funded by the government. 96% of that comes from Medicaid. The rest of that comes from Social Security payments that people pay to Mosaic for their room and board costs. These payments do not keep up with the price of inflation or the cost of living as it increases. So these payments are inadequate from the start, especially when you think about the wages that we need to pay our employees. The employees deserve them, but it is a big challenge. In our workforce, providers such as Mosaic experience staff turnover of rates exceeding 50%. That is extremely high when you think that these employees are the ones that know the people we serve the very best, and they're the biggest determinant of the quality of services delivered. The other issues are around the need to make strategic investments in the organization. So Mosaic and others like us are healthcare providers. And so as we're shifting to using more and more technology, that requires investments that just aren't possible when our revenue comes from Medicaid and other government funding sources. I wanted to lift this up because one of the challenges as we talk about ministry with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, you might say, well, gosh, why are the caregivers, it's somebody different every week? That has to do with workforce issues in general, right? And so I just wanted you to have some sense of awareness about that because I think it's really, really important. So at Mosaic, we believe that partnerships matter. We are a founding member of Lutheran Services in America. If you're not familiar with LSA, I encourage you to become familiar. More than 300 organizations touch the lives of 1 in 50 people here in the United States. We join with other big faith-based organizations such as Catholic Charities. But we really are the backbone of social services in this country. Religious organizations were founded early on in a response to needs of society. And we continue to remain engaged and in partnership today. The picture on the right is an example of us engaging in advocacy work. And I often say we do big A advocacy and little a advocacy. Little a advocacy is the work we do every day. So here's an example. We take someone we support to the doctor. The doctor is talking to the caregiver and not to the person themselves. And we suggest, let's make sure that we're talking to Joe, the person in service directly, and I'll help him if he has some questions, right? So that's just a way to elevate how we're thinking about people with disabilities as a society. Big A advocacy has to do with working with elected officials at the local, state, and federal level to work on issues that are important to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. And I think that's incredibly significant, especially at this time when there's so much political and economic uncertainty related to Medicaid. And so Mosaic has an advocacy program called Mosaic Allied Voices. You can find that on our website, but it's an opportunity for people to engage with their elected officials to lift up the issues that are important for not just the people we serve, but all people with intellectual and developmental disabilities across the country. So our policy focus continues to be on promoting opportunities for people to live a very full life. So a little more about Mosaic. This map shows a footprint of Mosaic. And so the states that are in blue, many of them have the stripes across, represent where Mosaic itself has a presence in delivering services. We have affiliated corporations such as Sorreo, that's in Arizona, and Living Innovations, that's in Maine, New Hampshire, Rhode Island. And so we're all direct providers of services. The light blue represents Easy Medical. That's a for-profit medical supply company that Mosaic purchased about 20 years ago to provide resources to support our mission and to meet the unique needs of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities as we think about disposable medical supplies. And then the states that are highlighted in purple represent the Mosaic, or the Rejoicing Spirits program, which is led by a Mosaic. Rejoicing Spirits was started through a grant from the Wheat Ridge Foundation many years ago, and as the program began to grow, Wheat Ridge reached out to Mosaic and asked if we'd be willing to take responsibility for this program and take it to scale. And you can see we now have a large footprint of Rejoicing Spirits programs. I'm going to talk more about that in a second. In fact, this map is already out of date. We now have our first Rejoicing Spirits congregation in North Dakota. So that Rejoicing Spirits really allows Mosaic to expand its support of people with IDD and their families. So what is Rejoicing Spirits? I think it is a phenomenal opportunity to help people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, their family members, and their caregivers to have an opportunity to engage in a worship service that's meaningful to them. I can tell you when I attend Rejoicing Spirits worship, I leave feeling renewed and excited about the opportunity for just spiritual growth for myself. So Rejoicing Spirits is a program, again, that offers meaningful, inclusive worship services. What I hear from congregations is they may have started this program because they thought it would be good for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But what happens is this actually becomes an energizing activity for the congregation itself. So for people who attend, this could be their first time really engaging with a faith community. It's a complementary service. It's not exclusive to people with intellectual or developmental disabilities. Oftentimes we find other people really enjoy going to the services. I do, because I like the music. I like the fact that we can use sign language. Maybe we use tambourines or other symbols during worship that make it meaningful, right? And so we are responsive to meeting the faith needs as the person themselves wants to experience and grow their faith. So I'm going to show you a quick video about Rejoicing Spirits at Mosaic.
Rejoicing Spirits is a place my kids love to go to that makes them feel good, feel welcome, feel like they're part of a group of caring people. Makes them feel important and involved.
When we come, he lights up. He will say amen. He will sing a little bit. He will use the instruments. He will look around at his peers. He'll listen to the stories. And he'll, at later times, I'll hear words repeated.
What I want most is for them to be comfortable and get something out of it. And I want them to feel love and to feel part of a group that's bigger than a family.
It is a wonderful and rare opportunity for us to worship God. And the difference it has made in my son is phenomenal. It's a wonderful socialization. It just brings joy to us because it makes him happy and it makes me happy.
I love that video. I love seeing the opportunity that people have to worship and worship with their friends. Rejoicing Spirits isn't for everyone. A pastor recently told me that she had 4 gentlemen who have intellectual and developmental disabilities who've been attending her Saturday night church worship service for the last 2 years, as long as she's been serving the congregation. So she was really excited about Rejoicing Spirits and said, hey, this worship service is coming up. I thought maybe you'd want to attend. And the gentleman looked her right in the eye and said, why would I want to go to that service? Because I already go here. And I have friends and connections there. The point is that for people who desire that strong connection and a different way of worship, Rejoicing Spirits has been a remarkable opportunity for people to learn and grow in their faith. If you're interested in learning more about Rejoicing Spirits, you can talk to Pastor Twyla Shook, who is the Vice President of Church Relations at Mosaic. Her email address is twila.schock@mosaicinfo.org, and she'd be glad to work with you. But you're going to probably hear more about Rejoicing Spirits throughout this Kindling Faith program. So what's to come? As we consider the rest of the Kindling Faith program, you're going to hear from some of the leading experts in the field of services to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and I am thrilled that they happen to work at Mosaic. So the first course is No One Grieves Alone, and we'll talk about loss in the IDD community. Mosaic has a very unique way of approaching grief and supporting people we serve, as well as their caregivers and families during times of loss. The second course is how to create community and focusing on worship in the IDD community. We've got a pastor that works for us who has done a remarkable job in developing worship services and resources that I know he didn't learn it in seminary. He has found a way to do things that I personally find to be very meaningful in worship. The third session then is to talk about education within this community. The fourth is to talk about behavior supports. And then the last is to talk about advocacy and effort and ethics. And I am, again, just absolutely thrilled with the people who are going to be teaching this course. I think you'll find them not only to be knowledgeable, but willing to challenge you and your thinking, and to think about things in a new and different way, which I think is one of the reasons you're signing up for this course. That's certainly what we heard from participants. So why is Mosaic different? We talked a little bit about why I think Mosaic was chosen as a partner with United Lutheran Seminary, but what makes us different is we're a nonprofit organization that has a rich history that is firmly grounded in our faith tradition. Many providers in our space are for-profit or even private equity-backed organizations. They have a different motivation for why it is they do the work they do. Secondly, why we do the work has never changed. The staff across Mosaic will tell you we're called to love and serve. But how we serve people and where we serve people continues to evolve to meet the needs of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, as well as the desires for their families. And I think that's exciting, that we're willing to take a look at what's best practice and respond accordingly. And then finally, we have a deep commitment to personalized services. We don't take a person and try to fit them into our program. We develop our program based on the hopes and desires and dreams of the people we support. And oftentimes those are things that you and I might just take for granted. For example, that we have the choice to about where we're going to live and who we're going to live with, right? And so I think those are 3 examples of things that make Mosaic different. You are likely to hear these themes when you participate in the rest of the courses, because it's just woven into who we are as an organization and into our DNA. So I want to end our time together by showing you a brief video that's going to show you the impact of Mosaic services on the lives of 2 special women.
I didn't work at that house in particular when they first met, but like from the get-go, when they'd come into the work center, they just became buddies. They'd hold hands, they'd talk, they'd joke. They were kind of inseparable.
I've known Boots and Terry for about 15 years now, from when I started work at Mosaic. They are 2 amazing women. If they have something that's going on, one don't want to go unless the other one is going.
I first met her in 2015, and I saw her and pat her knee, and we were just good friends and lived here.
That you my good friend, and that you a nice girl. I like her.
Right.
I stay with her all the time. Good friends all the time.
Yeah, we're pals.
They call each other my cupcake. I just heard them start doing it one day.
Yeah, she called her a cupcake. And she said, "Oh, really? I'm your little cupcake?" She said, "Yeah, you my cupcake."
They call me cupcake.
Yeah, you call me cupcake.
I have other clients too, but those 2 maybe they are so close and bonded together until they are the ones I think that really is keeping me here at this job long as I have been. So, and I really enjoy it.
When they chose me, it made me feel like they were family. I mean, I already felt that way, but it felt even more so because they were going to come live with me.
Tammy's a great person.
I like Tammy. She's my good friend.
She's a real good cook.
I was scared that maybe there would be somebody that didn't want to take both of them, and I didn't want them to get separated because they love each other so much. So I wanted both of them. Sorry.
That happens to be one of my favorite videos because I think it does such a nice job of articulating the difference that Mosaic makes in the lives of people. And at the end of the day, don't we all want to have meaningful relationships with other people? I hope you've enjoyed this introduction to Mosaic and to this course as part of the Kindling Faith series. I look forward to hearing more feedback about the courses. And again, thanks to United Lutheran Seminary for making this possible. Take care.